Welcome to Prismology. If you've ever felt that sudden closeness after betrayal, the way she reaches for you, the way intimacy seems urgent, almost desperate, your body may feel confused, but your intuition is already awake. Something doesn't add up. Stay with me, because near the end of this conversation, I'll explain the one detail most men miss, and it changes how you see everything. And if you value clear, honest insight into female psychology, take a moment now to like this video and subscribe. It helps this channel reach men who need clarity, not confusion. Now listen carefully. When a woman seeks immediate physical closeness after cheating, it is rarely about desire in the way men instinctively understand desire. This isn't passion, it's psychology under pressure. I want you to imagine what happens internally the moment a boundary is crossed. A woman who cheats experiences a collision of emotions at once: guilt, fear of loss, shame, and a sudden threat to her self-image. Most women don't see themselves as the kind of person who betrays. So when that identity fractures, the mind rushes to repair it. Physical closeness becomes a shortcut. In female psychology, intimacy is not only about attraction, it's about emotional regulation. When anxiety spikes, the nervous system looks for grounding, familiar touch, familiar closeness. The man who represents safety and stability, that's you. Not because she suddenly values you more, but because you symbolize relief from inner chaos. This is where many men misunderstand what's happening. You think she wants me, she chose me, but psychologically she is trying to quiet something inside herself. There's also something called cognitive dissonance at play. Her actions don't align with her values. That gap is painful. One way the mind closes that gap is by recreating a sense of connection with the partner she betrayed. If she can feel close to you again, even temporarily, her mind whispers, maybe it wasn't that bad, maybe I'm still a good person. This is not manipulation in a cartoon villain sense, it's self-preservation. Another layer most men never consider is fear of abandonment. After cheating, a woman becomes acutely aware of what she could lose. Even women who appeared emotionally distant before can suddenly become intensely affectionate. Not because the relationship is healed, but because the threat feels real now. Her body moves before her logic catches up. But here's the part that requires emotional maturity from you. Immediate intimacy after betrayal does not mean trust is restored. It does not mean understanding has occurred. It does not mean accountability has been processed. It means avoidance. Avoidance of difficult conversations. Avoidance of sitting with guilt. Avoidance of facing consequences. And when a man mistakes this closeness for resolution, he unknowingly teaches her nervous system that discomfort can be escaped, not addressed. I'm not telling you this to judge her. I'm telling you this so you don't betray yourself. Because the question is not why she wants closeness right now. The real question, the one we'll come back to later, is what happens after the closeness fades. And whether you are prepared for that emotional shift, there is a deeper reason this urgency appears. And it has nothing to do with lust. It has to do with control. Emotional control, not power over you. After cheating, a woman's internal world feels unstable. Her emotions swing, her thoughts race, and the certainty she once felt about herself collapses. In that moment, physical intimacy becomes a way to regain equilibrium. For many women, closeness is a language of reassurance. It says, I'm still connected, I'm still chosen, I haven't destroyed everything. When she initiates intimacy quickly, she's often asking a silent question through her body. Are we still okay? Am I still safe with you? Men often interpret this as desire, but psychologically it's more accurate to see it as testing. She is testing whether the bond still exists without having to face the discomfort of verbal accountability. Words require clarity, touch blurs lines, and when emotions are overwhelming, blurred lines feel safer. There's also an element of comparison happening beneath the surface. After cheating, a woman may unconsciously compare emotional states. With the other person, there may have been novelty, validation, or escape, but also insecurity and unfamiliarity. With you, there is history, recognition, and a known emotional rhythm. Returning to your body allows her to re-anchor herself to what feels real and grounded. This is why the intimacy can feel intense, even performative. She may seem more engaged, more present, more giving than she was before. Not because something has improved, but because something is being overcompensated for. Overcompensation is a defense mechanism. When guilt is unresolved, the psyche often swings to the opposite extreme. Excess closeness temporarily numbs self-reproach. For a short time, she can forget the internal conflict by focusing on physical connection. But here is the uncomfortable truth most men aren't told. This urgency often bypasses emotional repair. Real repair requires slowing down. It requires naming what happened, tolerating shame, listening to anger without shutting it down, and allowing trust to be uncertain for a while. Urgent intimacy skips all of that. It presses fast forward to a scene that looks like normal without doing the work that makes normal real. And your nervous system notices this. Even if your mind wants relief, you may feel a strange emptiness afterward, a sense that something important was left untouched. That's because emotional wounds don't heal through closeness alone. They heal through honesty and time. Another psychological layer here is self-soothing through validation. Being desired by you reassures her that she still holds value in your eyes. This validation temporarily eases shame, but because it's external, it doesn't last. And when it fades, the discomfort often returns, sometimes stronger than before. This is where patterns form. If intimacy becomes the escape route from accountability, it can quietly train both partners into a cycle where pain is never truly addressed, only postponed. I want you to understand this not to reject closeness, but to recognize timing. Intimacy without emotional grounding can confuse attachment, intensify dependency, and delay clarity. There's a subtle psychological trap many men fall into at this stage, and it feels almost intoxicating. After betrayal, when she reaches for you quickly, you may feel a surge of power, a sense of being wanted, chosen, desired again. Your ego whispers, "She came back to me." And emotionally, that can feel like victory. But I want you to slow down here. That feeling of power isn't dominance, it's relief mixed with validation. And if you mistake it for control, you risk losing your emotional footing without realizing it. From a psychological standpoint, what's happening is this. After cheating, a woman often feels internally fragmented. One part of her wants closeness, reassurance, and safety. Another part is overwhelmed by guilt and fear. When she initiates intimacy, she temporarily hands you the role of emotional stabilizer. That can feel empowering because suddenly you're needed again. But being needed is not the same as being respected, and it's not the same as being understood. Here's where many men unknowingly silence themselves. Because the closeness feels good, they avoid asking hard questions. They don't want to disrupt the moment. They don't want to push her away, so they trade clarity for comfort. And in doing so, they delay their own healing. Female psychology is deeply influenced by emotional states. When intimacy comes too quickly, it can act like emotional anesthesia. It numbs the discomfort without resolving its cause. And when the numbness wears off, unresolved emotions resurface, often as defensiveness, irritation, or emotional distance. This is why some men notice a strange pattern: intense closeness followed by coldness, warmth followed by withdrawal. It's not because she's playing games, it's because the underlying conflict was never metabolized emotionally. Another layer most men don't see is identity repair. After cheating, a woman's self-concept takes a hit. She doesn't just fear losing you, she fears seeing herself clearly. Intimacy allows her to momentarily step back into the role of partner, woman, desired instead of the one who crossed a line. It helps her avoid sitting with an identity she doesn't want to confront. And here's the critical point. When you accept intimacy without emotional clarity, you unintentionally participate in that avoidance. Again, this isn't about blame, it's about awareness. A psychologically grounded man doesn't reject closeness, but he doesn't let closeness replace truth. He understands that real connection requires emotional alignment, not just physical proximity. Your body might want reassurance. Your heart might want things to feel normal again. That's human. But your long-term stability depends on whether intimacy becomes a bridge to understanding or a wall that hides unresolved pain. There's something else happening beneath the surface that few men are prepared for. When a woman uses closeness to regulate her emotions after cheating, she may unconsciously associate relief with your availability, rather than accountability for her actions. That dynamic matters more than you realize, because in the next phase, when emotions settle and fear subsides, the relationship either moves toward deeper honesty or quietly slips back into imbalance. After the intensity fades, something unsettling often follows. You may notice a subtle emotional distance, a return to guarded behavior, or even irritation where warmth once was. This shift feels confusing because it contradicts what just happened. But psychologically, it makes sense. Once the immediate fear of loss passes, the nervous system recalibrates. The urgency that drove closeness dissolves, and whatever was avoided begins to resurface. Guilt doesn't disappear just because intimacy happened. It waits, and when it returns, it often brings defensiveness with it. For some women, closeness after cheating creates an internal contradiction. On one hand, intimacy soothed anxiety. On the other, it intensified self-awareness. Being close to you reminds her of the bond she risked, the trust she fractured, and the consequences she hasn't fully faced. That awareness can be emotionally uncomfortable, so distance becomes protection. Not protection from you, but from her own emotions. This is where many men feel destabilized. You may wonder what changed. You may replay the closeness in your mind, searching for meaning. And if you're not careful, you may start chasing reassurance, trying to recreate what felt like connection. but that pursuit quietly shifts the emotional balance. In female psychology, unresolved guilt can morph into emotional withdrawal. When a woman feels overwhelmed by internal conflict, she may unconsciously pull away to reduce stimulation. Distance helps her regulate. Unfortunately, to the man on the other side, it feels like rejection. There's also a deeper layer tied to autonomy. After cheating, a woman may feel trapped between fear of losing you and fear of losing herself. Immediate closeness can temporarily quiet the first fear. Distance helps her manage the second. Neither extreme represents emotional integration. They are swings between states, assuming the work in the middle is too painful. This is why clarity matters more than chemistry in moments like these. If intimacy happens before emotional processing, it often postpones the reckoning rather than resolving it. And postponed reckoning don't disappear. They return, sometimes months later, often disguised as confusion, resentment, or emotional numbness. Another truth men rarely hear is this: intimacy without accountability can distort memory. When closeness returns quickly, the mind can minimize the event that caused the rupture, not intentionally but neurologically. The brain prefers coherence over conflict, so it smooths over what doesn't fit. This is dangerous for both of you. For her, it delays growth. For you, it erodes self-trust. A grounded response doesn't mean punishment. It means pacing. It means allowing emotional reality to catch up with physical connection. It means being willing to sit in discomfort long enough for truth to surface. You are not wrong for wanting closeness. You are wrong only if you accept it as a substitute for understanding. Right here, after the closeness, after the confusion, you stand at a psychological crossroads most men don't even realize exists. And the direction you choose is not decided by what you say out loud, it's decided by what you tolerate internally. One path is unconscious reassurance. You accept the closeness, ignore the unease, and hope time smooths everything out. This path feels peaceful in the short term. There are fewer hard conversations, less tension, less risk of pushing her away. But beneath that calm, something important erodes: your sense of emotional authority. The other path is quiet self-respect. Not confrontation, not punishment, but internal clarity. You recognize that intimacy without understanding leaves you fragmented, so you slow the pace, not to withhold affection, but to allow reality to breathe. Female psychology responds deeply to emotional consistency. When a man stays grounded instead of reactive, it creates a mirror. She becomes more aware of her own emotional state, not because she's forced, but because the escape route is no longer available. This is where many men panic. They fear that if they don't immediately reassure, she'll drift further away. But psychologically, the opposite is often true. When closeness is available without emotional alignment, it loses its meaning. When it's paired with presence and boundaries, it gains depth. Boundaries are not ultimatums. They are emotional signals. They say, I'm here, but I'm not abandoning myself to keep you comfortable. And here's something critical. When a woman senses that intimacy no longer numbs the situation, she has to choose how to process her guilt. Some women step forward into honesty, others retreat further, but either way, truth emerges faster. Men who collapse into reassurance unknowingly delay this moment. Men who remain emotionally steady accelerate clarity. Another layer most men don't see is how this moment reshapes attraction. Long-term attraction in female psychology is tied to emotional safety and self-containment. A man who can tolerate uncertainty without begging for relief signals inner stability. That stability often restores respect, something panic never does. This doesn't mean withholding affection as leverage. It means not using affection as anesthesia. You don't need to lecture. You don't need to interrogate. You simply need to remain present without rushing resolution. When emotions are allowed to settle naturally, the truth has room to surface. And here's the uncomfortable reality. If intimacy is the only thing holding the connection preventing collapse, then the foundation was already unstable. Facing that truth hurts, but avoiding it hurts longer. What you are really deciding in this moment is not whether the relationship continues, but whether it continues honestly. Here is the insight most men never hear, and it's the one that determines everything that comes after this moment. What she does next is not shaped by the intimacy itself. It is shaped by what that intimacy meant emotionally. And meaning is created by your internal posture, not your reaction. If closeness became a way to erase consequences, the pattern will repeat. If closeness was allowed but not used to escape reality, the dynamic changes permanently. This is where psychological leadership quietly appears. A woman who cheats and then seeks immediate intimacy is standing in a fragile emotional state. She is watching, often unconsciously, to see whether reality bends to protect her from discomfort, or whether reality remains steady enough to require growth. When a man stays emotionally grounded, something profound happens. Her nervous system no longer has an easy exit, and without that exit, she must face herself. This is not cruelty. This is maturity. Many men think strength is expressed through control, anger, or withdrawal. In truth, strength here is expressed through emotional steadiness. You don't rush her forgiveness. You don't weaponize intimacy. You don't pretend nothing happened. You simply refuse to abandon your inner clarity. Female psychology is deeply sensitive to emotional incongruence. When words, actions, and energy don't align, trust erodes. But when a man's presence is calm and self respecting, it creates a psychological container where truth either emerges or avoidance becomes obvious. And that clarity is priceless. If she is capable of accountability, your steadiness gives her the safety to step into it. She can speak honestly without feeling attacked. She can process guilt without escaping it. She can rebuild not just connection, but character. If she is not capable, your steadiness exposes the limitation early, before years are lost to confusion and emotional erosion. Either outcome protects you. Here's the part most men underestimate. When you don't chase reassurance, you reconnect with your own intuition. You begin to feel again instead of numb. You notice patterns instead of explaining them away. You stop outsourcing your emotional stability to her responses. And that inner shift changes everything. You no longer ask, why is she acting this way? You begin asking, how do I feel in this dynamic? Do my actions align with my values? And am I honoring myself? Those questions restore self-trust. And self-trust is the foundation of any healthy relationship, whether with her or someone else. This is why the men who grow from betrayal don't become bitter. They become clearer. They stop confusing intensity with intimacy. They stop mistaking closeness for connection. They understand that real bonding requires emotional truth, not emotional urgency. And here's the final truth I promised you. If she wanted immediate intimacy after cheating, it wasn't because you were weak. It was because you represented safety, stability, emotional grounding. That is not something to be ashamed of. But safety without boundaries becomes a hiding place. Safety with self-respect becomes a catalyst. What happens next depends on whether you remain a place to escape or a place where honesty is required. You don't need to force outcomes. You don't need to demand promises. You don't need to rush healing. You need to stay aligned with yourself, because the man who understands this never loses his center no matter what choice she makes. And that is the kind of strength no betrayal can take from you. If this insight brought clarity to something you've been struggling to understand, like the video and subscribe. This channel exists to help you see situations clearly, without shame, without manipulation, and without losing yourself. If you want to know more about female psychology, subscribe this channel and press bell icon for early access to the new videos. Thanks for watching Prismology.